So, hi, my name is Michelle Morales. I'm the CEO of Mikva Challenge. Not native to Chicago. I was born and raised in New York and was a military brat and moved to Chicago to do my undergrad, fell in love with the city. Moving so much as a child, Chicago became home to me. The Puerto Rican community in Chicago became home, and I've lived here now since 1993. So, my own personal path of empowerment has been an interesting journey. As I mentioned, I'm the daughter of true Puerto Rican migrants who moved to New York City. My mother was 12 when she moved here, my father was 18. My mother, at 12 years old, was placed into the first grade because she was not bilingual, and that is how they dealt with young people who didn't speak any English. My father came here at 18 after interestingly working as a migrant farmer in most of southern US, and came here with a GED and not really knowing what a path was for him. And so growing up, my sister and I really, the strength that we saw in our family was really around their own personal journey in the United States. While Puerto Ricans are citizens, they had a very immigrant experience. And so we watched how our parents struggled through that experience to try to give, the traditional immigrant story, the American dream, to their children. My mother was a housewife. She is completely blind. So we grew up in a home where our mother did not work, did not engage really outside of the home because of her disability. And again, a woman also who really bore the brunt of society's sort of stigma, not only towards someone who only spoke English or had a very thick accent or Spanish and had a very thick accent when she spoke English, but also because of her disability. So there was a lot of school meetings where people were yelling at her because they thought that's how she would, one, understand English and hear them, because somehow blindness has to do with hearing. And just watching how she was constantly stigmatized. And so my sister and I kind of grew up in a way of watching that and never wanting that repeated, either to ourselves or to my nieces, my sister's daughters, or to other women that we encountered. And so that experience of watching how my mother was treated throughout her life, I think, was incredibly impactful to us. Being a woman of color, a Latina, first generation US born, first person to go to college in my family, there's another layer to empowerment that includes us owning our narrative, us owning our power, us owning our agency, understanding how much we have to contribute to society, overcoming daily microaggressions and macroaggressions, and how do we carve the path for other women behind us so that we're sharing in our knowledge and sharing in our agency. I've had a lot of role models that have influenced my journey. I've been blessed and privileged to do amazing community organizing work here in Chicago in the Puerto Rican community. Because of that, I've had the privilege to work alongside women who were former political prisoners that served over 20 years in prison for their role in trying to build an independent Puerto Rico. I'm lucky enough to call many of those women my friends. And so to, one, see their journey through their incarceration, but also know who they are post-incarceration and how they carry no cynicism and no bitterness and just are looking again, came out of prison and immediately started thinking about how can I contribute to my community. They have been significant role models to me. My mom's a role model, someone who has battled with her blindness and her disability her entire adult life, and yet is insanely positive, full of faith. She's the best grandmother on the planet. She plays with my kids and my nieces and nephews as though she's a child, and if you can believe it, plays hide and seek with them, knowing damn well that she'll never find them but with her blindness. But to me, that's a testament of her fun-loving spirit, despite, right? And my sister's a counselor at Albizu Campus Puerto Rican High School in Humboldt Park. My sister has overcome some really profound barriers, but still has an incredibly generous spirit, and I'm lucky that she and I are so close and I get to learn from her every day. So how do I stay empowered? It's a great question. I will say that it's hard. Um, I've been at Mikva for almost I'm entering into my fourth year, and the first 2 years here were really hard. Being in a leadership position, being seen as a leader, carrying the weight of that responsibility, not having the skill sets that most EDs have when they come into the executive directorship of a nonprofit. One of the things that I have created for myself that, to be honest, not only keeps my sanity, but keeps me moving forward is a board of directors of women. Chicago has a tremendous amount of women of color who are in leadership positions. I'm very lucky to call many of them my colleagues and my friends, and they're the ones that I call on. They're the ones that I cry to, that I reach out to in my moments where I don't think I can do leadership anymore, where I don't feel empowered, where I encountered a situation where I was disempowered or disenfranchised. And they're the ones that, one, help me to recognize that, yeah, whatever happened was really messed up. And then two, okay, how do we move forward, and what do you need to move forward? And so that's how I stay empowered, is by surrounding myself with other women who help push me forward. I'm very lucky to work at Mikva Challenge. Mikva works with over 10,000 high school students in Chicago to build their civic leadership and civic engagement. Of that amount, 50% are young women of color. So we're impacting daily 5,000 women of color in Chicago, ages 13 to 20, on how to live as civic leaders and how to live a civically engaged life. Mikva is an incredible space in that when a young person walks through the door, they walk in to a space that welcomes them, honors them for their lived experiences, and treats them like the adults that they should be treated as. And so I'm lucky to work here because I know that every single day in my leadership, by leading by example and working in the space and ensuring that we have programming, that we are empowering and helping to empower over 5,000 young women every year. So walking the path of empowerment is, I think, hard, and so that's one of the advice I would give women. Being an empowered woman, seeking to empower other women, seeking to create spaces of empowerment is not easy because it's also not the norm, and it pushes against mainstream norms and mainstream beliefs. And so the biggest advice I can give is know that it's hard. Expect it to be hard, expect it to be an emotional roller coaster, expect that your comfort zone is constantly pushed and that you're pushed outside of it. Be okay with that, and sort of, again, surround yourself with other women who are also walking the path of empowerment, because they validate and legitimize for you that what you're doing is right. So men should absolutely play a role in empowering women. I think that in this country, feminist circles and the feminist movement was very much about empowering women and giving women agency as it should have. But we also left men behind in that. And what I mean by that is structures will not change as long as men are not allies. And so how can we as women also ensure that men are allies in our movement? And so that's one of the things that we work on here at Mikva. That's how I train my son, is how can he be an ally to women? How can he create empowering spaces for women? What are the dynamics that, the privilege that he has as a cisgender male who also can pass for white? And how role does that play with women that he is around? I think that as a mom, I want to be explicit with him in that and not shy away from those conversations, because I think that informs him for the future. As an employer, I make sure my entire leadership staff is women and women of color. And so we have very clear roles here, and very, we have a lot of professional development for the men that come into our spaces as well, because it's often the first time that they've had females in boss positions and leadership positions. And as a community activist, I truly believe that men as allies, men playing a role in the empowerment of women, men supporting that role is really how our society and our country is going to shift its lens. We can see it with the current administration, with the conversations around the Kavanaugh hearings. We can see the language that is still used that is incredibly disempowering. And so if we're excluding men from that process, it's unfortunately going to stay the same. So men need to play a role, and we have to figure out a way to include them in that. When I close my eyes and I imagine an empowered woman, I always think of a woman of color. That's just kind of what pops in my head. And I always think of a woman who walks into a room self-assured, confident, but also pulling other women with her. I really detest when we don't do that as women, and we create barriers for other women. So for me, an empowered woman will be pulling other women along with her, and not just being in the spotlight alone. My hope for women on the planet, for us to realize the power that we have. I think because of how long we have been disempowered, and for as long as we've been marginalized, we often doubt our own power. And so I want us to really understand our own power, understand the strength that we bring, the intelligence that we bring, the beauty that we bring. And not to say that we don't need men, but I think often we still believe that for every aspect of our life we need a man alongside or a man leading. And I just want us to know that no, we can do it on our own, and we can do it with the support of men, but they don't have to lead it. My superpower, I'm gonna say, is empathy, which sometimes is a great superpower and sometimes really sucks, because you feel a little too much, you feel things a little too deeply, but I think particularly as a leader, I try to lead by example. I try to lead with a sense of vulnerability. I don't think you can do those things without empathy, and I think that as we're training and working with young leaders and youth leaders, you have to have empathy to be able to understand where they're at, where they're coming from, and where they want to go.